One thing that I see so many producers struggle with is the idea of workflow. If you don't know what workflow is, it's the concept that you want to basically streamline everything as much as possible to get ideas out of your head and into your computer or into your DAW as easily as possible. This leads to production sessions being a little bit more productive. This leads to writing sessions where you actually capture every idea in real time, because you don't want to spend time doing things like routing and color coding and naming for every single project. They're just a huge time waste. And one thing that I found that really improves my workflow is having a really solid template in my DAW that I can use to start every session. I do all of my productions, all of my mixes, all of my writing in this exact template. So in this video, I'm going to show you my current template that I'm using every single day. And to make it even better, we've actually made a folder of templates that you can download completely for free. We have templates for CUBASE, which is what I'm using here. So they're an exact one-to-one copy. We also have templates for Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton, Studio One, and Reaper. Every DAW is a little bit different, so there might be certain quirks in your specific template, but they're all going to be as close as possible. We hired a team of professionals to make them as one-to-one as possible so you can follow along in this video and you can save them and kind of have something that you can start your sessions with. So if you want to grab those, there is a free link in the description if you want to kind of use my production template and whatever DAW you're in. So let's go ahead and let's dive in. But before we do, my name's Austin. You're watching Make Pop Music. If you like this video, please make sure that you subscribe. We really, really appreciate it. Make sure you go grab those free downloads from our website. Let's take a look at my session. So here we are. I am in CUBASE 13. So if you're using CUBASE 13, there will be a couple templates you can download. I'm going to have one that has all of my effects as I have them in my template, but I'm also going to have a version that doesn't have any of my effects or super specific tracks, because if you don't have the same exact plugins, it's going to cause issues. So I actually recommend starting with the no effects version of the template in CUBASE. If you're in any other DAW, they're all going to be no effects versions. So just wanted to make that quick disclaimer, but let's go ahead and take a look and I'll kind of explain what I'm doing. So the first thing that you're going to see in my session is up top, I have this marker and I have this tempo track. So this marker track allows me to, place little markers. And then what I can do is I can actually type in, maybe this is the verse, maybe this is the chorus. And this just kind of allows me to have different markers where I can jump to them, right? So I can just jump to a marker. I can see, oh, everything within here is going to be a verse. So I always have that at the very top of my track. And then I have my tempo up here just so I can control that. I don't always love having to come down here to the master tempo. And if you want to do things like add a tempo ramp, you can do that on here as well with CUBASE's tempo track. So I always keep both of those at top. And then what I've done is I've actually added this little divider right here. So even as I scroll, my tempo and my marker always stay up top. For me, that just helps me not have to scroll through my project a ton to go back to things like that. So those always stay at the head of my project no matter what. That's pretty non-negotiable to me. Color for those doesn't really matter. You can kind of make them whatever. Now let's go over how my actual template is laid out. So you're going to see these are collapsible folders, and I have them for pretty much every category I regularly use all the way down. So I'll show you kind of what I have in mind, and then I'll kind of explain what's going to be available in the downloadable version that you have. So if we go here, basically all of these folders are kind of set up the same. You're going to see there's a folder up top that is colored and it has a name. So this one is yellow. It's called main drums. This right here, this little thing, there's no routing to that whatsoever. It is literally just for organization. So if I don't want to see my drums, I can close it. If I want to see them, I can open it. There's no routing happening there. So to kind of combat that, what I've done in every folder is I've actually made a group for that. So I have a group right here. This is main drums. You could also hear it called a drums bus, drum group, drum bus, kind of the same thing. And what this does is this allows me to basically process all of these individual tracks that I might have in here, like kick, snare, hi-hat, crash. All of those will get routed out to this drums bus. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow me to process those as one big element to do things like group processing or top-down mixing. So if, I have something in here, like if I drag in a kick and a snare into Groove Agent, and then I route this out to my main drums, I can process it on an individual channel, and then I can go process that on the group channel. So pretty much every folder is going to be set up like that. So main drums group, individual tracks below it. Aux drums, same thing. That one's orange for me. Again, kind of going to be just my group here. So I can add things like percussion loops, extra little snare hits, extra little like tambourines. Things that are not done by kind of the main drummer or the main drum groove will end up going into this track, and that's just so I can process those differently. When I print all of the stems at the end, I'll have a main drum stem, and then I'll have an aux drum stem. So, artists live can kind of just use this as the backing track for all of their percussion, and then they can get rid of this if they have a live drummer. Everything that I'm doing is set up so I can mix things better, and when I print it, artists can have really, really usable stems for basically every part of their production or their mix. So that's kind of my workflow going down the entire thing. So we've got main drums, and then just like a drum rack in there that's probably not going to be in most versions that you download, but I'm always using Groove Agent, so I just have it here. Then we have aux drums, and we have effects. This is where I do things like risers, hits, transitional effects. This is not like synths and effects tracks and anything like that. This is going to be more like ear candy stuff. We have a bass track right here with my bass group. So this is where synth bass, real bass, bass layers, all of those are coming in here so I can process that on a group. Same thing with synths, all of my, synth plugins, my keys, any kind of like synth strings, all of those will come into here. So like if I wanted to do something like add analog lab, I could put it right here, route that out to synths and keys. And then CUBASE will go ahead and color coordinate that green because that's where I dragged it. And then I could just label this Syn Pad 01. And now my routing is done, my naming convention is done, my coloring is done. And that's all because I have everything in this kind of color coordinated, collapsible architecture. Then we have my guitars. So we have a guitar group right here. For things like guitars, bass, and vocals where I live track them a bunch, I like to have an input track just set up already. So this is set up with my system right now. So it's coming into my ASP1, which is where I track all of my guitars and basses. So if I want to do things like just lay down DI, it comes right in there. I don't have to set up routing. I don't have to set up anything. Don't have to fuss. And then I have a guitar track right here that's actually a stereo track. So if I want to do things like make a guitar chain that has chorus or a stereo delay or a stereo reverb, I can just create that on this chain, drag my DI straight from down here into here, and now I have a guitar tone that I can start working with immediately. I try not to have too many, right-click, add track, right-click, add track. It's just not very good for my workflow. If we come down here, we see my lead vocals bus. So this is where like leads for verse, chorus, pre-chorus, etc. are going. Sometimes I'll do my dubs on here as well, just because harmonically they're doing the same thing as the leads. Sometimes I'll put those in my harmonies. It really just depends on the song. And then again, I have my input chain, which is just a mono input. You can see that my mic chain is the input source here, and that's getting routed out to my lead vocals bus or group. And then I have a lead vocal chain right here that I'll typically just pop a quick chain on while I'm tracking, and then I can drag everything from this vocal in right down to my vocal chain, and I can start kind of hearing everything back in real time. So all of that is in lead vocals. Then I have some Vox effects. This is going to be one of the things that's not in the templates that you download, but it's just some chains that I'm typically using. So like I have a low wide vocal. So it's basically auto-tune, pitch down a whole octave, crushing it a little bit with decapitator, and then using things like a doubler to spread it. Basically just effects that I use all the time. We have a washy reverb right here that's sidechained to the lead vocal. Just things that if I find myself using it at least 5 out of 10 times, I'm just going to end up putting it in my template, saving that for later because I keep going back to it. And if I don't end up using these for a project, I can easily just, shift, delete, and remove a project. It's not really a huge deal. I'd rather have more things to kind of streamline my workflow and just get rid of them as I don't need them, rather than start with too blank of a slate and then always have to be adding things that I'm typically doing pretty much every time anyway. So for this, I have that low wide vocal, I have that washy reverb, I have things like a big reverb throw where I can just drag down a certain word or phrase and it's just got this really massive reverb on it to do things like those big reverb tails on the end of like a phrase or a sentence. Then I have a quarter note delay throw to do the same thing, but with a quarter note delay, and then an eighth note delay throw to do the same thing, but with an eighth note delay. And again, I don't always use those. If I don't, I can easily just highlight them and delete them, or in CUBASE, you can go over here and you can hide them. It's not really a huge deal, but I like to have them just in case. Then I have a vocal harmonies bus. This is where all of my harmonies go, so I can just bus process those if I want to. Also have a harmony tracking input chain. I have my oohs and ahs bus. Sometimes I'll also call this background vocals, just depending on like how many ad libs or how many oohs or how many ahs. Am I doing vocal pads? This one kind of changes on the project just depending on what I need, so I'll rename this one pretty often. But I always have it there just so I have an extra group or an extra bus for things like some of those more ambient background vocals. And once again, I have a little mono input right here, so if I'm tracking it, I can just track it right in here. It'll be color-coded, it'll be organized, and then I can collapse that folder. Now that I've shown you part one of my template, which is basically all of these folders and then all of these main groups and then kind of the individual tracks, what we're going to do is I'm actually going to skip the effects for now because I want to end up showing you this. So I call this group tracks. This is really where everything starts to kind of wind up. So let me just show you one by one, because this is where if you don't have familiarity with routing, it could get confusing, but I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. So when I showed you this main drums bus up here, I told you that anything that falls under that will get routed to main drums, right? So then you can process that with compression, EQ, but then that main drums bus is actually getting routed out to this right here called all drums. So all drums is down here. It's just this orange group. And this is where I can have that main drums. I'm going to have the aux drums right here wind up, and then I'm going to have a couple different reverbs and synths and things like that. So what I like to do is I like to let every individual section of elements have their own group, and then I'll have the broader section end up in something like this. So if you're an artist, you're going to get the main drums, which is probably kick, snare, hi-hat, toms, crashes. You're going to get aux, which is going to be loops, percussion fills, things like that. And then you're going to get this all drums bus, which is basically everything with all of the bus processing as well baked in. So I like having these down here. It just allows one more layer where I can process or print from, and it just makes it easy. It's also easy to start gain staging too. So I basically have 3 areas to gain stage. I can gain stage on individual tracks. I can gain stage on buses or groups, and then I can gain stage on these larger groups over here. And then all of that will end up going to what I'm calling master bus automation, which we'll talk about in 1 second. So right here, all drums basically has everything from, we can see right here, these sources, main drums, aux drums, and my drum parallel send that we'll talk about in a second. Then I have a group that's drum and bass. So this is going to get the all drums bus and the bass bus up here. So that's coming into this, and that's coming into this, as you can see right here. 2 sources, bass and all drums. This allows me to do things like control low-end information or control the relationship between drum and bass a little bit better, and just do things like start metering how heavy is my low end, how heavy is my low mids. If I need to sculpt, this is kind of a good place to do that. It's also a really nice stem to have for, like, you know, mixing a track for TV or anything like that. Similarly, we have a synth and guitar. So I told you that all of my synths and keys will go to this group right here. All of my guitars will come to this group right here. And then each of these groups will come out to this. You could also call this the music group. So I have this for if I want to do any like mid-side processing on basically the entire musical bed. If I want to do things like add track spacers so my lead vocal can kind of start ducking out the musical bed in the chorus, this is a really good place to do that. And again, it's a really good place to just have a big macro control of the overall level of synth and guitar and, you know, orchestra elements and piano. Any kind of melodic element that's not bass, probably going into this big bus right here. Or a group right here. If I'm using bus and group interchangeably, just know they're the same thing in this instance. And then we have this vocal effects return. I'm going to talk about that in 1 second. We're going to skip it for now. And then right here, we have the all vocals track. So this is where everything vocal related will end up. So if we go up here, all of my lead vocals should go to this lead vocals bus, but then this lead vocal is going to all vocals. All of my vocal effects should come to this bus. This is also going to all vocals after that. Vocal harmonies are coming in here. That's going into all vocals. Oohs and ahs and background vocals, that's ending up in all vocals. So this ends up basically being my acapella track, right? So if I want all of my vocals, all of my vocal bus effects, all of my reverb sends, delay sends, all of that ends up here. And the reason that I have it like that is so as I print my lead vocal stem or my vocal harmony stem or my oohs and ahs stem, those can stay pretty dry and pretty specific to what's happening for that section, but then the artist still has just a big giant processed acapella right here. And again, this is the last place that I can do big macro volume controls. So if all of the vocals feel too quiet, I'm just going to bump them up. If they all feel too loud, I'll bump it down. If there's a big mid build up once everything's, you know, stacked up, I can handle that right here. It's just one of those things of having that element where you can control all of the vocals at once. And then the last thing that ends up there is this vocal returns bus. So this will help when I look at the effects channels. I like having some sends and some parallel processing already routed out. So in your version, these won't have anything on them, but I'll have like a drum parallel where I'll do, you know, compression, or maybe I add something like a room response. So I can kind of blend that into my drum taste, and that's just getting routed out to my old drums. So that wet signal from that parallel ends up being able to be blended right here. And then it'll just put that output into that all drums bus that we have a little bit later. Then we go to our vocals. So we have this parallel compression. This is where I'll do things like distort things, add extra air, add crispiness. I actually hardly ever use it with this chain. This is just what's on there. A lot of the time I'll swap this out for different distortion plugins or different compression plugins. But I like to have it routed at least. Same thing with the vocal widening. I use this for everything. I use the Dimension D. This is one that if you download the template, I actually recommend you popping your version of this plugin on it. So I use the one from Arturia. There's also one from UAD. You could also use Doubler by Waves. You could also just use a really big fat chorus effect at 100%. But essentially, this is how I add width to my vocals. So that parallel widening send. I have a long vocal reverb, which is typically a hall or a plate or a chamber. I have a short reverb, which is typically like a room or a really, really short hall. I have a stereo quarter note delay, so that's just a quarter note delay that's either stereo or ping pong, depending on, how I want it, but I just have the option to swap it right there on a project by project basis. And the cool thing about having all of these sends and stuff like that is you can post-process them. So I'll do the filtering, also known as like the Abbey Road technique, on a lot of the reverbs and delays, just to start kind of cleaning them up. Every song, these end up getting moved around depending on what it needs. But I like having it there just in case I want to start filtering out pretty early in my production and mix phase. We also have the same thing, but for an eighth note delay. We have my slapback delay, which I'm just using repeater for. This is just to add things like a little bit of width and a little bit of that slappy kind of reverb delay effect. We have a mono delay right here that, to be honest, I don't use a ton, but when I need it, it's just really nice to have one. And then we have a guitar and synth delay and a guitar and synth reverb that stay empty until I need them. But this is just for if I want, a bunch of different guitars or a bunch of different synths that have the same reverb, have the same delay element. Instead of me popping the same reverb on 13 guitar tracks, I can just add it on the send, and then I can blend it into taste on each specific one. So all of these sends end up in slightly different places. So the drums parallel ends up in this all drums group. All of these vocals will end up in this vocal effects return group. And the reason that I did that is because then when I print all of my final stems and multi-tracks and things like that, they'll have a stem that is legitimately all of the reverbs, all of the widening, all of the delay, all of the slapback. And so if they want to go in and they want to remix how wet their vocal is in something like a TV mix, a live mix, a remix, they'll have the dry vocal from all of these other groups up here, and then they'll have that kind of wet return. And it just helps me, again, process things. Like sometimes I like to, filter out my returns. Sometimes I like to do things like add some mid-side processing where I boost the sides of my returns. It just allows me to have a really, really microscopic control of every single thing that's happening in my mix. And the last thing that I have on here is my master bus automation. So this is where I just have a general mix bus chain, which I've talked about on the channel 100 times. And my sources for this are going to be the effects group that we had way up top. We have the drum and bass group, the synth and guitar group, and the all vocals group. So everything eventually ends up coming out to this master bus automation. Most of them will just filter in through different groups and different layers as they come down to the bottom. So that is pretty much how I have it set up for every single project. Again, sometimes I'm taking certain things out. Sometimes I'm adding in new elements. Sometimes I'm moving things around or I'm changing naming schemes. But if you look at this basically gives me the flexibility to have everything I could ever want kind of already set up. So all I have to do is start dialing in chains, start dialing in effects, and then I'm good to go. The last thing that I have on my template is not going to be in the downloadable versions because it's very specific to me, but this is just my MIDI I/O routing. So I have some analog synths in the studio. So I just have all of their MIDI outs and all of their audio ins basically linked up. So if I want to play my Juno 106, I just drag MIDI down to here. I just arm this track and it'll record it back in. Same thing with my Polybrute, and then same thing with my Juno DS88. So I can essentially pop the MIDI here, adjust the parameters on the physical synth over there or under the desk, and then just arm this track, and it's set to Polybrute in, it's set to 106 in, it's set to DS88 in. And that's what I mean. Like, this is so streamlined. I don't have to do any patchwork. I don't have to do any like resetting of my studio. everything is kind of ready to go. So again, if you want a template for your DAW, if you're using Cubase or Pro Tools or Logic or Ableton or Reaper or Studio One, you can download my version of a template for whatever DAW you're in. Down below, it's completely free. We hired a team of professionals for this, so if there are any issues, please let us know. We can have them revise them, change them, tweak them. And if you're in a DAW that we don't have supported quite yet, let us know down below and we can try to add one. We thought about doing one for FL Studios, but it's so different when it's laid out that I don't know how applicable a lot of this routing is for FL. But if you're in it and you want to follow along and try to create your own version as close as possible, feel free to send it to us. We can always add it in the downloads for everybody. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed it. I know that this is one of those more kind of like geeky technical workflow videos, but it's something that I see so many people neglect in their workflow. And it's something that I think can really speed up your process and can really just like unlock your creativity, because you don't have to think about the really monotonous shit when you're trying to get an idea into your DAW. You don't have to figure out, oh, let me make my guitar input track. Oh, which input do I have the guitar going to? Oh, why are there all these hardware? I don't want to do that. I just want to plug my guitar in and go. So hopefully this template helps you out. If it does, please leave a like and please comment below what videos you want to see in the near future. We have a really, really special announcement coming next week that I'm super, super excited about. But until then, that's going to do it for this video. We'll see you soon. Much love. Peace.